Hello and welcome again to another episode of Compelling Conversations podcast. I'm Steve Ramerini, the founder and chief visionary of Compel CEOs. I'm your host. And with us today, we're very pleased to have Mark Altman. Mark is the founder of Mindset.
It's Mindset Go. All
Right, I
over.
know. I had this all planned out. Okay, we'll start again, Matt. Okay. Yeah, I did this out of order. I thought it was easier out of order. Okay. Hello and welcome again to Compelling Conversations podcast. My name is Steve Ramerini. I'm the founder and chief visionary officer of Compel CEOs and your host for these podcasts. And today we're very pleased to have with us Mark Altman, who launched and runs Mindset Go, which is an innovative training organization that works with individuals to excite them to apply new skills, knowledge, and behaviors to improve both not just their individual talents and skills, but also those of the teams that they work with. Mindset Go also improves leadership, mid-level managers, and teams by developing both communications on an internal and external basis, and by facilitating sustainable mindset, attitude, and habit change. Previously, Mark has been an entrepreneur for a very long time, well over 20 years. He first established his first business, Mark Altman and Associates, back in 2001, and later won and was recognized by Inc. magazine as one of the fastest growing privately held companies in the nation in both 2010 and 2011. After selling his company a short time after, he became an investor and a member in Launchpad Investment Group in Boston, and we're pleased to have him in this week to speak to our Compel group. So, Mark, welcome. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Steve. Thrilled to be here.
So, in reading through your vitae, I know that one of the things you talk about is multi-generational, conversational, and emotional intelligence as a way to help leaders improve. Maybe you could talk a little bit about each one of those for a few minutes.
Sure. I think the most succinct way to say it, Steve, is what I've heard repeatedly from our clients is we've figured out a secret sauce that few others have. And the secret sauce is if you're learning how to be an effective communicator, you can Google that. You can Google how to be a good communicator. There's plenty of resources, and ChatGPT especially now. What we've done is we figured out how to mix conversational intelligence and emotional intelligence. How to communicate effectively when it's hard to, when you're facing adversity, when you're having conversations with people that have disappointed and frustrated you, and you have unmet expectations with. People who blame, criticize, accuse. People who make excuses. People who, what I call the killer Ds, deflect, defend, deny, and dismiss. And that's when you earn your money as a communicator. I mean, let's be honest. When people trust you, when they're engaged and motivated by you, and everything's going well, it's not that hard to communicate. It's how well do you communicate in the face of adversity. And so by blending the conversational and emotional piece, we call it being an emotionally agile communicator, and that's the core of it.
Interesting. I know we were speaking earlier, and we both seem to agree that probably 70 or more % of business owners out there are not skilled at coaching and communicating properly to get, first, what are their expectations, and then offering up either accountability or performance improvement with their workers. How's some of the ways that you impact that when you take on a client?
Yeah, so I love talking about this because there's a concept I call the writing reflex. And the writing reflex is spelled RIGHTING. And the writing reflex is what I believe most people think coaching is. The writing reflex is telling someone what they're doing wrong, how to do it better, and why they should care. It's parenting them, essentially. The joke I always make, Steve, is that if you know a cigarette smoker, what is the go-to line since the beginning of man and womankind we tell people to get them to stop smoking, which is, it's going to kill you. Every cigarette smoker alive knows it's going to kill them, but yet they keep doing it. So coaching people to stop smoking by telling them something they already know is probably not going to be an effective strategy. So in the workplace, when it comes to coaching people, that's what I see people lean on, that writing reflex piece. And look, if you've got someone that's working for you that isn't delegating enough, is too emotional, is resistant to change, coaching them isn't telling them why they should be less emotional, how they should be less emotional. It's about getting buy-in. It's about asking questions. It's about listening to understand. It's about using empathy as a tool of influence. And so I just find the ultimate piece of coaching that is missed is the simple expression, lead with questions and not statements. And I think that's ultimately what the writing reflex is about, is don't do that. That's a statement. Ask questions to understand the barriers and fears that are in the way.
I couldn't agree more. Asking questions seems to be, in what I do, the secret sauce. It's always better to help someone find the solution than giving it to them, because they're not going to follow it 100% anyway. But, you mentioned delegating, and that seems to be one of the most challenging tasks or events in the life of an entrepreneur, is delegating. Because, yes, they can do things better, faster, and more efficiently than anyone that will ever work for them in all likelihood. So they refuse to delegate. How are some of the ways that you've helped people improve their delegating skills? And also, like, I know, and I try to tell them this, you can't just say, here, you're in charge of this, and expect them, the person that you've delegated that task to do it to any degree without some coaching, some guidance, some expectations, some performance review, etc. So,
yeah, I mean, the starting point for me is whenever you're coaching someone to delegate more effectively, you can give them all the tools and strategies, but you have to understand why they're not delegating in the first place. And here's the example. The example is, if you don't trust the people you would delegate to, the answer is why. Is it you're going to tell me that you don't want to delegate because of past experience? And I always say to executives, if you kept track over the course of your career how many times you've delegated, it would be in the thousands, right? And of course the answer is yes. So the follow-up question is, now if you kept track of how many positive experiences you've had delegating versus negative experiences, it would be a great differential of successes versus failures. And of course the answer is typically yes. But our brain teaches us to remember the failures and not the successes. And so the reality is, if you are not delegating, it could be because of a narrative you created for yourself, which says, I can't trust these people. So my point is that the first thing I do when coaching delegation is recognize it takes two to tango. Look inward before blaming outward, because the likelihood that your delegation failures, you probably had a role in those failures, whether it's setting clear expectations, whether it's poor follow-up, whether it's gauging the skill set and the experience level of the people you were delegating the specific task or project to. So that's where I start, because you asked me before about the different types of communication, and everything starts with managing yourself and managing your mindset and looking inward about how to be more accountable.
So you also mentioned empathy, and I know over the last few years, we all know over the last few years, empathy is being, promoted more and more, especially as the workforce changes over. So how does that factor in with what you do with your clients?
Well, I have a couple of things to add to that, Steve. First, I just made the point about delegation. You can give someone all the tools in the world, but if they don't trust who they're delegating to, it doesn't matter. Well, the same goes for empathy. If you personally, and I'm going to be very candid here, and I'm 52 years old, most of the people that I encounter in leadership positions that struggle to empathize are 50 and 60-year-old men. And the reality is, if you associate the word empathy with being soft, enabling, and weak, then I can give you all the empathy tools in the book. But if that's how you associate the word, and the reality is, it's very simple concept. If you ever encounter someone, Steve, that says, hey, I got a thick skin, you got an axe to grind with me, you got a problem with me, tell me just tell me I can take it. I always say, don't ever do that. Because when you lead with criticism, no matter how kindly you deliver it, okay, people shut down. They get defensive, they make excuses, they try to justify their actions. If you lead with empathy, authentic, effortless empathy, if you lead with that, it sets a different tone. You're more likely to get a collaborative dialogue. You're more likely to see people show that you're interested in more than just their mistake or where they failed. So I'm on a mission, Steve. I'll be very candid with you. I'm on a mission as part of the work I'm doing at Mindset Go to take words like empathy, mindfulness, emotional intelligence that many people have negative associations and coach it in a way where they can hear it, process it, and apply it.
That's another term that we've been hearing. I've been hearing a lot recently, mindfulness. And I would say I've only encountered a few people who truly understand it. And I'm sure that that's another hurdle that you've got to get over with your clients. How do you do that as it relates to mindfulness?
Yep. Well, the first thing I do is I don't use the word because of how people associate it. So I know this sounds terrible, Steve, but I try to trick people and use a different word so they don't know it's actually mindfulness. It comes down to this. The two most important life habits, and I'll go to my grave. No one will convince me otherwise. Number one, self-reflection, and number two, self-awareness. Because the reality is, we are all rushing around from meeting to meeting to task. And if you don't slow down enough to reflect on how to do things differently, how to make things better for your organization, for your people, whatever, you can't improve. And the reality is, being mindful is being present. It's thinking, it's reflecting, it's slowing down enough. And self-awareness is the positive consequence, so to speak, of self-reflection. And self-awareness is, beyond the obvious reasons, is critical because you can't change a habit until you recognize the opportunity to change the habit. And that's what self-awareness is all about.
Great. Thank you. Now, the other thing, and I've heard this before from other speakers, as far as criticism goes, but there are times where we are going to have a very challenging, difficult conversation. I know you push for courageous conversations. What's your definition?
Well, a courageous conversation, first definition is it's not actually one conversation. That's where the myth begins. The quick analogy I'll make is the single most ineffective, courageous conversation that human beings have is the sex talk with their kids. Think about it. It's a conversation that neither side is looking forward to. The premise behind the sex talk is, I'm going to have one 45-minute conversation about sex with my kids, and then when it's over, I'm going to go, whew, glad that's over, never have to talk about that again. So a courageous conversation is usually two macro conversations in a series of small micro conversations. And here's an even more simple way to explain it. Think about the term procrastination. If you ever meet someone that's a procrastinator, they didn't start procrastinating yesterday. They probably procrastinated their whole life. So you're going to have a 30-minute conversation with an employee or team member who's missing deadlines, who's been procrastinating their whole life. And at the end of that 30-minute conversation, when you tell them how bad procrastinating is, they're going to look at you and go, oh, thank God you've enlightened me. I never knew procrastination was so bad. I'm going to change my behavior on a dime. And that's the thing about a courageous conversation. The expectations have to be realistic. Behavior change is incremental. There's certain things in the workplace, safety issues, sexual harassment, those things you can't wait. Like, they have to change immediately. But the majority of things you coach people on and have that courageous conversation to hold people accountable, you have to have realistic conversations, because if they've been doing it even for the 4 years during the pandemic, they're not going to change on a dime. So it's not one conversation, and have realistic expectations are the starting point.
I think that's great advice because, and it's interesting you use the word procrastination. I see that a lot of times when our members have to have a conversation, have to deliver not good news. And maybe it's because they haven't been holding people as accountable, or they didn't set the right expectations. And so they know they have to have this conversation, but they're kicking it down the road and they're procrastinating, so that by the time they get to this, they want to have one and done. And they don't want to have the building blocks in there that you're describing of it's more than one conversation. It's a lot of little conversations, and then it's at least two bigger conversations.
Yeah, and Steve, I just add one more thing. This brings everything full circle. I mentioned the writing reflex before. So now you have HR leaders and C-suite executives telling different people in the organization, hey man, you just got to have a courageous conversation. You just got to hold those people accountable. Well, if I'm not comfortable having a courageous conversation, you just didn't coach me how to do it. You just told me to do it. And so the reality is, again, the avoidance happens because either there's a lack of assertiveness, there's a conflict resolution piece, there could be a relationship that they feel like may suffer. So again, until you get to the barriers and fears that are in the way, that conversation's not going to happen. And by the way, even if it does happen, this is another thing. Even if the conversation happens, does it have to be good, or do we just have to have it? Like, can we not just have the conversation? Can it be an effective conversation? That's a piece too.
That is a very important piece, because I think a lot of these conversations are occurring with, I just want to get my piece out.
You're right.
I want to get what I have to say out, and I don't care what they're going to say. I know they're going to push back. Well, there might be something of value in their pushback.
True, very true.
I know you also specialize in multi-generational conversations, and that everybody knows that we have 5 generations in the workplace, very distinctly different, and the percentages are changing rapidly all the time. Is that one of the bigger areas that you're involved with now, and how do you approach that?
Steve, I'm going to tell you 2 very short stories that will provide tools at the same time. The first story is 5 seconds.
Okay.
So I was at an executive peer group, and there was about a 60-year-old man who said to me, who was complaining about millennials and Gen Z. Let's just keep it simple. And I looked at him and I said, can I ask you something? And he goes, sure. I go, do you know anybody your own age that's a pain in the ass? And he goes, I do. I go, then you don't have a generational problem. You have an adaptational problem. And so foundationally, we're all so different. And there is not one set of rules to lead people. And so for the generational piece, my frustration level is so many leaders who are parents. I say to them, do you treat your kids the same way? And of course, the answer is no. And if your kids play sports or extracurriculars, do you want your coaches to treat everybody the same way? And of course, the answer is no. So why do we hold generational communication? If you have younger generations, they have good things to offer, stereotypically, and there's some stigmas that aren't always positive. But that's the same with our generation, Steve. So like why? So again, adaptational versus generational. That's the theme I always talk about. And I don't think most people know what adapting is, because they have one playbook and how to coach and influence people. The other story, really quickly, I'll share. This is really powerful. So I had a guy who was doing a generational communication workshop, and he said to me specifically, he said, Mark, you don't get it, which I always find is a great way to start giving feedback to someone, because now I'm totally open-minded because I was just criticized. I don't get it. I don't get it because you don't realize all millennials and Gen Z are lazy and entitled. So it goes back to a comment you just made a couple of minutes ago. I don't try to convince people. I think that's a terrible way to coach. So I said, okay, what don't I understand? And he proceeded to tell a story of someone at his company who was a millennial, who we would all agree, Steve, was lazy and entitled. So I said, gee, that sounds awful. I said, if I were in your shoes, I'd feel the same way. I said, let me ask you, how many millennials and Gen Z do you have at your company? He said, probably about 20. And I said, do you have 19 other stories or just the one that confirms your bias? And
That was a powerful question,
right?
I got to tell you.
And so he said, I get it. And I said, nope, I don't think you do. And I said, let me challenge you this way. I said, I know it may seem like I'm trying to change your mind, but I'm actually trying to do the opposite. I want you to change your mind. And this is the question I want you to leave here with today about generational communication. I said, you can think all millennials and Gen Z are lazy and entitled, but every time you have a conversation with someone in your company who's a millennial and Gen Z, they have an O2 count to start the conversation. And I'm curious how that belief system serves your relationships at that company. And Steve, son of a gun, the guy looks at me and he says, I never thought of it that way. And I go, good, I did my job because you realized on your own, not by me telling you.
I think that's a great term, an O2 count. How many people in your organization have an O2 count by the time you sit down to chat with them, or by the time you sit down to get to know them, or have to talk to them about another task that they're doing? We have these limited beliefs we put in our mind.
Yep.
And that is one of them, this limited belief about Gen Z and Gen X and the millennials and whatnot. So thank you for sharing that.
And I want to tell you, just building on what you just said, we talked earlier in the podcast about accountability. I was coaching an executive just this morning, and he was exhibiting a limiting belief about holding people accountable. And I find that one of the limiting beliefs that hurts executives is that the act of holding someone accountable is an aggressive act. And it's not, it's an assertive act. You're not being mean when look, Steve, if you work for me and you're not hitting your deadlines and I have to have a courageous conversation with you, I don't have to be mean about it. I don't have to be a jerk about it. It can be collaborative. It can be supportive. But that's a common limiting belief that holding someone accountable is a mean or aggressive act.
And that's pervasive on both sides.
I agree.
Of the conversation.
I agree.
I've seen that. Obviously, I get to work more with the owners and the leaders of the organizations, if you will. So I see it from their perspective. But I also try to put myself in the position of the person that they're going to have to speak to about it, and how are they going to receive this? Because most of the times, you're right. We hear the negatives. We hear the horror stories.
Yep.
How often we hear a success story, because that's what I guess the expectations. Oh yeah, it was supposed to be that way. Well, maybe not.
True.
You have a lot of interesting bits of information that you've given us. If you were to put a playbook together for someone, and I realize that, in the words of Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So, your playbook is only as good as, you go out and put it into use. But if you were to put a playbook together for entrepreneurs, new business owners, what are the first things that you would tell them that they need to be good at?
I think the first thing is identifying core habits and behaviors at your company that demonstrate the core values. Whether it's how you treat the customers, whether it's how you treat each other, whether it's how you treat how leaders treat team members. I think we fall in love with these terms like respect and integrity and trust and all these things. They're just so broad and so vague, and they just mean the same thing to everybody. But actually, having correlating actions and behaviors so you know what success looks like in your company, because success looks like how you talk to and treat people. Like, that's where it's got to start. So that would be one thing. The second thing is determine what examples you want to lead by, because I have this expression about leading by example. It's leading by example has two huge flaws. One, it presumes people notice your examples, and two, it presumes they only notice your good ones. So I think that, if you're going to inspire people, if you're going to be a visionary, and if you're going to motivate people, what are the examples you want them to notice? How do you want to be seen? How do you want to be heard? And how do you want to manage your emotions? So that would be number two. And, the last one is kind of interesting. And that is, I have a rule when I coach people, and the rule is you're not allowed to be cruel to yourself unless you can justify it. Because most people that I've encountered that are entrepreneurs and owners default to criticism and negativity when evaluating themselves and their performance. And if you're driven, if you have high standards, you tend to tear yourself down. And so my third piece of advice would be set clear success criteria to sustain your confidence and motivation. Because as you know, Steve, there's so many pitfalls and ups and downs in being a business owner, that having that success template to say, okay, I may not be perfect today, I may not have handled this situation well today, but boy, I am doing these three things well consistently, so I can improve, but I do have a foundation that I know I'm doing a good job, and I think that's essential.
And going back to something you said earlier, the two other critical factors obviously are the self-awareness and the self-reflection.
Yeah.
I've noticed this with a lot of my clients. They're so busy doing that they don't take the time out to look and see why, or even, is there a better how? So those are very critical elements to success. And I know you just touched upon culture a little bit, but I'd like you to say a few more words about culture, because that also is now something we're hearing more and more about, that culture will attract the best. And, if you don't have a culture that you set, then someone else is going to set it for you. And it may not be the culture you want.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. So there's something called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS, which I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Yes.
So I've always loved that. I think there's so many good pieces to that. And I've always felt it's missing one fundamental piece, and that's the people side. That's more of the foundational, functional structure side of the business. And so we've created something at Mindset Go called the Cultural Operating System, the COS, as opposed to EOS. And the foundational piece to COS is something we call common language. And common language is, when we train companies, we insist that we train their executive team and the next level management down, because everybody's got to be drinking from the same fountain. The way they give and receive feedback to each other, the way they handle conflict, the way they solve problems, the way they set clear expectations. And so what we do is we help companies within their culture create this cultural operating system using common language. And the profound impact we're seeing is it removes the hierarchy, because everybody's playing by the same set of rules. Everybody's playing by the same set of behaviors and guidelines. And we've seen tremendous impact in the companies we've implemented this in. So my long-winded answer here for culture is having that common language foundation that the entire company, and then having those correlating actions and behaviors that equal the values, those have been huge.
It's interesting. I'm pretty familiar with the EOS system. We've had speakers into our groups, and it's a great system.
It is. I agree.
But when I've seen it not work, is all on the people.
Right.
And it's a shame. And I there's one example that comes to mind where I had a business owner say, I have to see if they're capable of implementing this. And so I'm expecting that I'll lose $50,000 this next year. Well, the year is over and he lost over $250,000, which he wasn't happy with. it was a hard lesson, but they weren't the right people. They said all the right things. They did all the right things. And I think even the culture was good, but maybe it was lack of communications. It just seems like there was some missing piece.
Well, I have a theory, and I felt strongly about this for a while. EOS is a change initiative, right? So it's a change initiative in itself. You're asking people to do things they're not doing at all, not doing consistently, or not doing well. So if you don't treat it like a change management initiative and get people embracing, adapting, bought in, that's where I see the failure point. So I think a lot of people are told, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to run our L10 meetings. We're going to do this and do that. But I think if you don't have the buy-in from the people side, and even if you have that buy-in, you still have to develop your people. The succession planning pieces, so many other pieces. So again, you and I are totally aligned on this. Good system has many pros to it, and I'm hoping the cultural operating system can be like a complementary piece. And selfishly, with EOS implementers, I'm trying to expand my network there because I think it's a good complementary piece.
I think it's a very complementary piece. I think it's probably the fundamental piece. What is it that we are? What is it that we stand for? And
well said.
That has to be the foundation.
Yeah.
Let's say. Well, you've given us a lot of great nuggets today. I'm sure our audience is going to have to listen to this several times to make sure they got it all down. Mark, thank you very much. Looking forward to the rest of the presentations you're making this week. And if you're interested in booking Mark, please reach out to us because we do have a speaker bureau, and we'd love to get him some more presentation opportunities.
And I just like to add, Steve, I find it a huge privilege to be working with Compel CEOs. I appreciate this opportunity, and I know you have a tremendous reputation, and you're doing some great things. So I'm thrilled to be a partner with you guys on this.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate that. Until next time, on our next podcast, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you down the road.